welcome to the podcast, Tis But a Scratch, fact and fiction about the Middle Ages. I'm your host, Professor Richard Abels. This is a special short episode on what I consider to be one of the more interesting movies about the Middle Ages, the 1995 Norwegian language Kristin Lavransdatter, a studiously faithful adaptation of the first volume of Sigrid Undset's Nobel Prize winning trilogy of the same name. Neither the book nor the movie has received the attention it deserves, at least outside of Scandinavia, and I think that this is because popular interest in medieval Scandinavia is pretty much limited to the Viking Age. This episode is also a sort of mea culpa. I talked about Undset's trilogy in the previous episode with Kat Tracy, and realized afterwards that I had messed up some of the details of the novels. Since Kat and I had decided to divide the episode on medieval adultery and popular culture into separate episodes on literature and movies, I thought I could make corrections when talking about the film. But I also wanted that episode to focus on Arthurian films, and Kristin Lavransdatter is as far from that as one can get and still be medieval. As neither Kat nor Ellen have read the novels or seen the movie, I'm doing this as a solo episode. The focus is still on medieval adultery, but that is at the center of the movie and the novel that is based on, the first book of the trilogy that makes up Kristin Lavransdatter, The Wreath. Kristin Lavransdatter is a trilogy of novels about the life of the daughter of a prosperous farmer in Norway in the first half of the 14th century. The trilogy traces Kristin's life from her childhood to her death from the plague in a convent as an aged widow, which in this case means around 50 years old. Although largely forgotten today outside of Norway, Kristin Lavransdatter won Undset the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1928. It is the atypical historical novel about the Middle Ages, one that isn't about kings, knights in shining armor, courtly love, chivalry, and war. Undset wrote about the upper class, but the world she attempted to recreate in her novels is life in rural Norway among ordinary people. The protagonist of the trilogy is also unconventional, at least unconventional before the 1970s, in being a woman. What made Kristin Lavransdatter an immediate sensation when it first appeared is its historical verisimilitude. Undset spent 20 years researching the world of Kristin Lavransdatter, and it shows in the novel's descriptions and details. Few, if any, of Undset's contemporaries in academia could match her knowledge of the sagas, ballads, legal treatises, religious practices, and the material world of 14th century Norway. The last was due to her appreciation of the value of archaeological evidence, the legacy of her father, an eminent archaeologist of Iron Age Scandinavia. Undset announced her goal in a letter written when she was still a teenager. She wanted to bring to life, to make real, the world she encountered in the sagas, explicitly rejecting the romantic medievalism of Sir Walter Scott. Undset explained that she would retell the stories realistically so that, quote, everything that seems so romantic from here, murder, violent episodes, etc., becomes ordinary, comes to life, end quote. And she accomplished this in her greatest novels, Kristin Lavransdatter and The Master of Hesviken. She honed her skill as a novelist by writing contemporary realistic fiction. Her first novel, Marta Uliep, published in 1907 when she was still only 25 years old, is a first-person account of a woman's adultery and that woman's guilt at betraying not only her husband, but herself out of boredom and a desire for romance. Undset wanted to bring that type of realism to a novel about the 14th century. Kristin Lavransdatter succeeds in feeling real, written in simple, direct prose. Unlike the deliberately archaic language of medieval romanticism, the novel seems to be about real people living real lives. The care with which Undset describes the world that they lived in simultaneously establishes the world as alien, but makes the people within it real. Although Undset accurately described the mores, religious beliefs, and customs of early 14th century Norway, academics continue to debate whether the mentalite of the characters' understanding of their worlds, their attitudes, their values, and particularly Kristin's, is in fact medieval or more reflective of Undset's own ideas about how a woman in Kristin's circumstances should think and behave. So let's now turn to the film adaptation of Kristin Lavransdatter. The movie, directed by the famed Norwegian actress Liv Ullmann and released in 1995, is a faithful adaptation of the first of the three novels, The Wreath. In it, as in the novel, adultery plays a central role. I'll give a summary of the movie's plot. I watched this movie in Norwegian without English subtitles, and I don't speak Norwegian, but the movie seems to be very faithful to the novel, which I reviewed again in preparation for this episode. So here goes, and this is true for both the novel and the movie. At the beginning of the movie, Kristin is a child of 7. She is the daughter of Lavrans, a wealthy and well-respected landowner. Lavrans and his wife, Rainfrid, had lost 3 sons in infancy, and Kristin's older sister was crippled in an accident. They lavish attention on the young Kristin. At the age of 15, Kristin exchanges professions of love with a childhood friend, Arn. Kristin is then nearly raped by the bastard grandson of the village priest, but she fights him off. The would-be rapist heaps insult upon injury by slandering Kristin, claiming that she had had sex with Arn. This leads to a fight in which Arn is killed. Kristin is devastated. Her parents are also upset because of damage to her reputation. To restore it, they send Kristin to a convent, not to take vows, but to take lessons with the nuns. While Kristin is in the convent, Lavrans arranges a marriage between her and Simon Dahr, the son of a neighboring landowner. Kristin is not attracted to Simon, as she was to Arn, but she agrees to the betrothal. That ends with a market trip into the city, Oslo, accompanied by another convent guest. In a market trip to the city, Oslo, with another convent guest, she meets a handsome knight attached to the royal court, Erlend Nicolasson. He is the nephew of a family acquaintance, which makes it okay for Kristin to greet him. What she doesn't know about him is that he is notorious. When Erlend was 18 years old, he ran off with the wife of a prominent judge. He has lived with this woman, Eileen Ormsdatter, as his mistress for 10 years. She has borne him 2 children, but because they are illegitimate, they cannot inherit Erlend's estate. The scandal costs both Eileen and Erlend. Eileen becomes a social pariah. Erlend has promised to marry her, but they cannot marry while her husband still lives. Erlend, for his part, is excommunicated by the bishop. In the novel, the king outlaws him, and he has to purchase a pardon by turning over part of his estate. I'm not sure whether this comes across in the movie, but it's in the novel. His family distance themselves from him. Erlend, however, over the years, has grown tired of Eileen and resentful at what she has caused him. He would like her simply gone, but because of the children, he allows her and the children to live at his main estate. That's the situation when he meets Kristin. The two are immediately attracted to one another. This is hardly a romantic movie, and this is more lust at first sight than love. Erlend seduces the virgin Kristin, and they begin a passionate, clandestine affair. He asks Kristin to marry him, despite having previously promised to marry Eileen upon her husband's death. Kristin knows nothing of this. She returns home to ask Simon to release her from their betrothal. Simon is hurt and only reluctantly agrees. He insists that she take responsibility and tell her father. Lavrans is shamed by his daughter's renunciation of the betrothal and angrily refuses to give his blessing to a marriage with Erlend, whom he regards as a scoundrel. Kristin's mother suspects that her daughter is no longer a virgin and tries to convince her husband to agree to the marriage, but he is adamant. Meanwhile, Eileen, whose husband has finally died, tracks Erlend down to the house of Frau Aschild, Kristin's aunt and mentor, a woman also of dubious reputation, as she is a healer who is suspected by the villagers of having poisoned her husband, which he didn't. The village is a hotbed of false rumors. There, Eileen announces the death of her despised husband and insists that Erlend fulfill his promise. Erlend refuses, telling her, quote, "I promised that 10 years ago, and since that time, you and I have lived together year in, year out, like two damned souls in hell," end quote. Okay, you may be wondering, understandably wondering, how I know that is what Erlend said in the movie, given my confessed ignorance of Norwegian. I watched the movie with the novel by my side. The version I watched on YouTube had Spanish subtitles, and between my knowledge of German and Old English, the text of the book, and the subtitles, I was able to translate the dialogue in several key scenes. And what I can tell you is that the dialogue in the movie is taken directly from the novel. I know that is a great way to kill the tension in what is the most dramatic scene of the movie, but let's get back to that scene. Following this, Eileen confronts Kristin. She knows about Erlend's affair with Kristin, but Kristin is only now learning about Eileen. Eileen warns Kristin that Erlend will eventually dispose of her when he grows tired of her charms, as he is doing now to Eileen. But she then concedes defeat to the younger woman, and drawing out a horn from her baggage, asks Kristin to drink with her and promise to be a good stepmother to her children. As Kristin is about to drink, Erlend enters the room. Seeing Kristin holding the horn and the smirk on the face of Eileen, Erlend susses out that the horn contains poison. He grabs it out of Kristin's hand and orders Eileen to drink from it first. Eileen shrinks back and Erlend tries to force her to drink. Kristin grabs the cup back and tells Erlend that one of his paramours must drink, as he cannot have both of them. Again, Erlend forces the cup on Eileen, who grabs a knife, wounds Erlend. In the novel, Eileen stabs herself. In the movie, it appears that Erlend stabs her. As Eileen lies dying, she tells Erlend that the poison was meant for him for all the times that he deceived her. The only obstacle now remaining to Kristin and Erlend's marriage is Lavrans's refusal. He is as obstinate as his daughter is willful, and for 3 years Kristin lives in sin with Erlend, until finally Lavrans is worn down and agrees. The movie and the novel both end with Kristin's marriage and wedding night. It's not a happy ending. Kristin is 3 months pregnant. Both Kristin and Erlend are riddled with guilt over the death of Eileen. It is in the conclusion of the film that the movie departs a bit from the novel, and not to the movie's benefit. In both, lightning strikes the church on the eve of the wedding. Erlend, Lavrans, and the villagers salvage the valuable liturgical objects and manuscripts from the burning building. The symbolism is painfully obvious. Yes, we know that Kristin and Erlend have committed not only the sins of fornication and adultery, but are at the very least complicit in the death of Eileen. But do we really need a divine visitation to reinforce this? Undset, however, included the lightning strike precisely to respond to this objection and to illuminate the character of Kristin. In the novel, Kristin is consumed by guilt and terrified by the fire as God's judgment upon her sins. She seeks out the priest to tell him that this is a sign that she is unworthy of having a wedding feast and unworthy to wear a bridal gown. She and Erlend should marry in private. The priest responds angrily. Do you think that God cares so much about how you sluts fly about and cast yourselves away that he would burn up a venerable church for your sake? The priest then tells her to get over her sinful pride and that her suggestion would bring shame to her mother and Lavrans. The visitation, he tells her, is on all the congregation, because all have sins. But he adds that she and Erland, more than most, need the rights of the church when they wed. She must mend her life, and adds that she and Erland should make amends by helping to rebuild the church. The movie omits Kristin's conversation with the priest. Instead, the movie cuts immediately from a distant shot of the church consumed by flames to the wedding itself. Frankly, if I came to the movie without first having read the novel, at this point I would be muttering something along the lines of screenplay by Captain Obvious. In the novel, the wedding feast doesn't go smoothly for Kristin. She keeps seeing the face of the dead Aileen staring at her in condemnation. Kristin cannot eat as she should because she is suffering from morning sickness. This too is left out of the movie, which really puzzles me, as it seems key to establishing the crushing guilt that Kristin feels and her unworthiness to wear the golden crown of a virgin bride. The movie segues quickly from the marriage ceremony to the traditional public bedding of the newlyweds. The groom and bride are led to the marriage bed by family, friends, and well-wishers. Erland's friends are playfully tapping his groin as he undresses. Kristin awaits her husband on the marital bed wearing a golden bridal crown. She properly has her eyes cast down, not looking at her new husband, as befits a shy virgin bride. But then she looks directly into the face of Erland and smiles. This Lavrans notices. Finally, to his shame, he recognizes what everyone else knows. Kristin is no longer a virgin. The movie doesn't end with Kristin and Erland, but with Lavrans and Rainford. Rainford finds her husband lying dead drunk in a cart and takes him into the house. Lavrans suffers from the shame over his daughter's actions and from a hidden guilt. The upright Lavrans, who takes pride in being honorable, confesses and apologizes to his wife. He tells her that he married her without loving her, and that he had loved another, though he had never consummated the relationship. Rainford responds with her own confession. She tells him that she was not a virgin when they married, that she too had loved another, and he had seduced and abandoned her. Lavrans responds by telling her that he knew that, and that was one of the reasons why he could not give her the affection and physical love that she asked of him. They accept the revelations and forgive each other. The movie ends with Lavrans and Rainford walking together hand in hand as Kristin rises from her marriage bed to watch them from the window. It's a bittersweet ending. The movie emphasizes the shame of adultery in the religious culture of late medieval Norway. One can understand, if not approve, of Erland's desire to rid himself of Aileen. Their adulterous affair cost him excommunication from church, estrangement from his family, and in the novel, a sentence of outlawry from the king. It also cost him land and money to obtain pardons from the king and the bishop. Because their children are illegitimate, Erland still has no heirs to whom he can leave his property so that it will remain in the family. Aileen, for her part, is a social pariah. She has only her children and Erland has clearly grown tired of being tied to her. If adultery is costly to men and women of knightly rank, it's even worse for those of lower rank. For ordinary villagers and townspeople, the penalty includes public shaming. What this entails is shown in a scene without dialogue or explanation that immediately follows Kristin's first meeting with Erland in the marketplace. We see a man seated backward on a horse, his hands tied behind him and his head hanging down, being paraded through town. Walking behind him is a distressed woman who's being jeered at by the townspeople and pelted with refuse. This is an accurate portrayal of an early modern charivari, a ritual of public shame. I don't know if that ritual was actually used in 14th century Norway. The evidence for it comes from Renaissance sources, but it is an accurate portrayal of a ritual of humiliation. As you can tell from Kat's absence, this is an addition to our recording. I've talked about the film and novel in detail because I think it is one of the most interesting and nuanced treatments of medieval adultery on film. It's not a great film. It's 3 hours long and it seems to drag in spots. But I may have enjoyed it more if it had English subtitles. It's beautifully filmed, and the scenes of medieval farm life and the urban market are spot on. The movie really doesn't have any heroes or villains, except of course for the would-be rapist. All the male-female relationships in the movie are complicated. Adultery is presented as shameful if it becomes public and sinful. But that doesn't prevent it from happening, especially given that marriages are contracted by families for practical reasons, not love, and marriage is indissoluble. The church's attitude towards marriage and adultery in the 14th century is also portrayed accurately. The movie's fidelity to the novel shows how much it is a labor of love. The director and the guiding hand behind the movie is the distinguished Norwegian actress Liv Ullmann, who was Ingmar Bergman's leading lady in several of his most famous films. In interviews, Ullmann explained that she had played the role of Kristin in a play when she was young and had wanted to make this movie for many years. And it's probably not by chance that Elizabeth Matheson, who plays Kristin, looks strikingly like a young Liv Ullmann. The movie's critical reception in the U.S. has been so-so. I'm not surprised. As I said, it's long and it's slow. But things were very different when it was released in Norway. It is that country's highest grossing film. And the reason for that is that it's estimated that 2/3 of the Norwegian population has seen it. If you are a medieval nerd like me, it's definitely worth seeing, though only if you either speak Norwegian or can find a copy of the film with English subtitles. I couldn't. Otherwise, read Undset's trilogy. That really is worthwhile. And with this episode, we are finally done with medieval adultery. The next episode that we do will be on the Crusades, an examination of the Battle of Hattin, in which Saladin pretty much wiped out the military force of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. That episode will be with Nicholas Morton, and following that, we'll have another episode on the Crusades, this one with the British historian Steve Tibble, and that will be on his new book on criminal crusaders. Yes, there were criminal crusaders, and we're going to hear about them. If you are enjoying this podcast, if you are enjoying Tis But a Scratch, please think about maybe reviewing it and giving it a rating on the podcast platform that you use. That's probably the best way of spreading the word and growing the audience. Until next time, bye for now.